Good morning, everybody. Today we are going to check up William Wordsworth's poem The World is Too Much with Us. William Wordsworth is known as the high priest of nature, for whom nature was not simply an object with beautiful setting, but he found in nature a deep spiritual significance. Nature was to him a great moral being, throbbing with life, and he found a clear affinity between man and nature, a likeness in the ordinances of nature and highest human virtues. He believed that nature carries the most potent and educative influences in life. The World is Too Much with Us is one of the most famous of Wordsworth's sonnets, which expresses in the most eloquent and emphatic manner his love of nature as well as his strongest loathing or detestation for the growing materialism of the era. People in modern times are so much preoccupied and obsessed with worldly, materialistic affairs that their souls are dead to the beauties of nature, and therefore their lives have become dull and useless. It is a matter of shame and sadness that, in spite of the guidance of culture and Christianity, we go astray, leave communion with nature, and become worshippers of Mammon. Mammon is the god of wealth. It brings out most strongly his belief that the soul of man sinks to its lowest if a person loses communion with the spirit of nature and gets too much engrossed in wealth and materialism. Wordsworth was opportune to write this famous sonnet at a time when, during the first industrial revolution, mammon or wealth or materialism had become the god for the people who became obsessed with wealth. Love for nature was being given up by the majority, and materialism became an evil influence or false object of worship and devotion for them. Wordsworth looked upon nature and man as two complementary manifestations of the same spirit and could not but regards with dismay the severance of man from nature. The exact date of composition of the sonnet is probably 1806, yet it is not certain and it is unknown. But it was published for the first time in 1807. Later on, it was included in miscellaneous sonnets as part of Wordsworth's collected works. As we proceed, we are going to discuss the binarism that is present in this sonnet, and we can call that binarism in the form of nature versus materialism. The sonnet is a heartfelt outburst against the surging wave of the soulless materialism of his age. A devout adorer of nature, as Wordsworth is, he could not accept the idea of leading a life other than that of an association with nature. He strikes at the root of growing materialism, loss of love for nature, and increase in love for accumulation of wealth. The poet vehemently decries this craze for money that has cut off man from moorings of nature and let him adrift in the tide of mammon. He reminds the reader of the sermons of Christ. What shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Unquote. He condemns the man's conception of happiness as flowing from material prosperity, plenty, and profusion, because material joys cannot give permanent happiness against the splendors of nature. The gifts of nature for the joy of human soul can never be replaced by what money and the luxury associated with it can give. And hence the poet says, the sea that bears her bosom to the moon, the winds that will be howling at all hours and are upgathered now like sleeping flowers. These are the beauties of nature towards which humankind or most of the people have shut their eyes and ears. Their senses are not open to see these beauties, these majesties of nature. Next, we are going to take up the things in the shape of an oxymoron which is present here, and that oxymoron has become part and parcel of people's life, and it is the loss of connection with nature is described as a sordid boon. A sordid boon is an oxymoron that I will discuss here. As the sonnet opens, we find that Wordsworth is pained to see his contemporaries obsessed too much with the worldly loves and lures of wealth and luxury and such other material advantages which will necessarily smother the growth of tender feelings of the heart. Money-minded people have lost communion with nature and waste their energies in fruitless and futile errands of life. Quote here, getting and spending we lay waste our powers, unquote, and we have given our hearts away a sordid boon. The oxymoron sordid boon foregrounds the poet's pain and anguish for the mounting materialistic craze and unholy and futile pursuit for wealth, and reveals his anguish for human beings have become so base that they are unworthy of the glorious blessings that nature always showers on them. Though nature has a ready reserve of pure, calm, and serene happiness and divine joy, yet exceedingly blinded by the glare for gold, we have lost sight of the beauties of nature, and that is painful. Its serenity and purity, and lost touch with nature that is ours. Human beings have become oblivious or unmindful of what the beauty of the sea, the moon, the wind bestows upon them. It is so because they are insensibly absorbed in the material world and cannot be enthralled by nature. Nature is almost dead to them, and they have ceased to respond to nature lovingly. Next, we come to the second part of the sonnet, and in that he gives us a solution to the problem that has been raised in part 1 of the sonnet, and that problem is the preoccupation of the human beings with too much wealth or materialism. And the solution is found in the shape of nature would make us less forlorn. While concluding the sonnet with an impatient yearning in protest against the heedless, the soulless religion of the materialistic people, the poet exclaims that they have cut themselves off from the active principles of nature, that is, love for this beautiful earth, the craftsmanship of God, losing their heart to the worship of Mammon in the pursuit of wealth, luxuries, and material advantages of life. Rather than be one of such soulless people and remain cut off from the joyous, comforting, strengthening, cheerful influences of the scenes, sights, and sounds of nature, the poet would change his creed for the absolute pantheism of the Greeks. In that case, he would find himself always surrounded by the pulsating, animated life of nature, whose spirit is akin to the human soul in him. And he thinks that it would make me less forlorn, that is, nature would make him feel less lonely. He would be able to sympathize with the grand spectacle of the sea by believing that he saw the sea god Neptune, sea god Proteus, rise from the sea, and also be able to feel genuine delight in the solemn sounds of the sea, believing that Triton, the son of Neptune, was silencing the sea waves by blowing loud his trumpet, which is a spiral conch shell. There is a universal appeal in the poem, and this universal appeal comes here in this shape. The sonnet is emotion arousing and thought provoking, for it holds universal appeal to human beings of all eras and ages, warning against the involvements and undue attractions rather, of material prosperity. The worldly allurements have gripped the heart and mind, thoughts and feelings and activities of people so much that they have completely lost faith in what is beautiful, true, and real in nature. They have neither the eye nor the ear to derive pleasure from the beauty, majesty, and quietness of nature. In a way, we can say people have turned a deaf ear to the beauties of nature, majesties of nature. The glory of the silences and sounds of nature have no appeal for them. The sense to appreciate, love, and admire nature is virtually dead. Wordsworth gives pictures of the sea associated with such sights and sounds that speak to him as a romantic poet as well as a great verbal artist also. The sonnet is a convincing example of the English or Miltonic sonnet divided into an octave and a sestet, but the pause comes in the middle of the 9th line with an exclamation, "Great God," which is the key to the emotion behind the thought in the poem. The poet appeals to humankind to realize that human happiness depends upon the things that they possess, not upon those which possess them. Wordsworth conveys this mighty truth not as a gospel or an abstract doctrine or an argumentative appeal, but he urges the reader's heart, as a poet should, so intensely as to transfer the very emotion to the reader through his stimulated feelings. Thank you.